Dr. Avik Sarkar. He would be speaking on ethical concerns in healthcare AI applications. Dr. Sarkar is the visiting professor at Indian School of Business. And previously, he was also leading the data analytics cell of Niti Aayog as the head. May I invite Dr. Sarkar for his talk?
Thanks, Anjali, for the introduction. I would like to thank Ashoka University, Professor Ravi and Dr. Anjali. Thanks a lot for setting up such an interesting session because I really liked and loved all the sessions from the morning, and you are really invited all the stalwarts in the industry, which was really nice to hear them speak, including Professor Pushpak Bhattacharya. He taught me the basics of AI when I was at IIT Bombay. Like my first neural network course, he was my professor at IIT Bombay, and from him I learned neural networks. So it was nice to be speaking on the same platform with him. So thanks for this opportunity. I know I think I'm running a bit late, but I think the aspect that I will cover will be very different from what the other people have talked about. The other speakers have spoken about the opportunities, and I think this is a very good phase that the opportunities have been covered, the applications has been covered, and now I'll move on to the implications for India and the implications for the society at large. And that is the aspect where I will pick up from here. I broke up my talk into two areas: healthcare application in the Indian context, which I feel now, given that there were about close to 3 talks on the healthcare aspect, and along with, like, I had examples from Google and Wadhwani, which, believe me, I have not copied from them in the talk before, but it was there in my slides from before. So they are there, but there are a few other applications also. And then we'll come to the ethical aspects about AI and asking us the questions. So I come from a background of developing AI applications. And then during my time at Niti Aayog, we came up with this national strategy for artificial intelligence. This was the document that we came up for. And this actually answers a lot of questions. There was an interesting question where Professor Shudeshna was giving her lecture on how many people in India are doing AI research, and there was some question on that. So this paper has a very detailed analysis on the number of institutions. So we actually tied up with Springer and saw their publications for the last 20 years in artificial intelligence globally and also in India, and saw that a handful of institutions, less than 15 to 20 institutions in India, are really doing good research in AI, and less than 50 researchers in India who are publishing in really top-notch journals. And our ranking is way below. So this is not something that I want to cover here, but since there was a question already, then I feel I will answer that. And this report has details of that. So if anyone is interested, can go and read that aspect there. But then a lot of the things that I will be talking in this class are also in this session are again for a course that I take in artificial intelligence and society. And these are basically snippets of those aspects, again, fine-tuned for the agriculture, for the healthcare domain. So when we came up with the national strategy of AI, there were these 4 aspects that we were primarily interested in. And these 4 aspects were primarily setting up this center of research excellence. And these are like developing the core aspects of AI, like say developing computer vision, as Mayank was talking about, or developing the algorithms of deep learning, as Gautam was talking about, or as Professor Pushpak was talking about, what are the NLP, deep NLP technologies that we need to develop. So there is a need for a more enhanced research in those areas. And that is where the Center for Research Excellence would do that. The next one is the Center for applying this research onto a particular domain, and that is where you will see these 5 areas that are listed below. So these were the 5 areas of importance to India that we had listed down, and we saw several talks about how it is used in healthcare. The Wadhwani and Mr. Alpan talked about its use in agriculture. The previous speaker, professor, spoke about its application in the in the supply chain domain, and there can be also applications in education, as Professor Sudeshna talked about. So that is the next level of research and development that is required. The third area which is required, and which is very much required for, say, mass adaptation of this aspect, is centers for studies in technological sustainability. And unfortunately, in India, we do not have a single established institute which is doing decent research on these areas. Because this requires scientific and computer science understanding, understanding of sociological, political, and policy areas, and also understanding of law. None of the institutes in India research, or some of the think tanks are trying to do that, but they're only scratching the surface. So there's a lot of study that needs to be done here. Another thing which I would also like to address to the students at Ashoka is that I think, given your sort of background on what you learn, I think you are very uniquely placed to take up this mantle of studying what are the technological innovations and what are the technological studies that you can do in the AI space, and then progress the research on that front. Skilling in AI is another area, but I think that's not something that I can cover today. So these are some of the broad areas that we talk about when we focused on this document that I'm talking about. Now coming directly to the healthcare perspective, healthcare AI can touch upon various aspects, and it can be from early detection, as we saw from the Google example, or diagnosis, decision making, keeping well, just tracking how things are happening over time. It can help in training. It can help in research, like some of the speakers were talking about, using historic clinical data and historic COVID cases to accelerate your research. And then end of life care. So the range of applications that can be done there, and we can spend like several days just talking about all the healthcare applications which are just possible. So I'll just list a few. Identifying of high-risk patients from the historic data that is there based on patient records, I think is a very common application that is there. And identification of healthcare trends, say looking at different healthcare trends and how it is happening, and then doing some prediction of the healthcare trends and building up facilities or building up capacity along those lines. These are things that often governments require. Patient readmission risk. Often if you have to readmit a patient, there is a huge insurance component that comes in. So patient readmission risk is something that can be done with the healthcare thing in mind, healthcare AI. Medical transcript and research. There are tons and tons of those research, and doctors have to spend a considerable amount of time going through this stuff. And then there is the other aspect of giving some automated transcription. Can some automated transcription be given by the doctors on this front? There are several healthcare chatbots that have been there in the market now, which you can ask about your symptoms and it will do some amount of diagnosis. Again, these are all running on AI and natural language processing. How are they doing in the market? And then one aspect of healthcare that we see are the facilities, and these facilities have huge expensive machines, and these machines, if they break down, it can be huge loss, both monetarily and also loss of life and patient care, because it's a critical equipment, so there needs maintenance in real time. So can we do like predictive asset maintenance on this? So this is just a few handful. There are tons of literature on this, on the possible application in healthcare. A few ones that I have chosen today has been discussed previously. So early healthcare detection on the diabetic, on the cardiac risk, which is been done by Apollo and Google in India. Where they take in some real-time data from the patient and do some blood tests based on which the healthcare risks are provided. The next is diabetic retinopathy. Again, when I was at Niti Aayog, we were working with Apollo and Microsoft on some of these pilots. And as you heard Manish talk about it, Google is doing a great work on this domain. The other one, the next one is for Wadwani AI. This is Alpan gave a very detailed presentation on this along with videos. So I think the audience knows about this, how this is done. So these are some of the applications I wanted to touch upon. Now I will come directly to the societal aspects of AI. And why are we, I will start by asking you a few basic questions and about why we are facing this societal issue. Because we have multiple goals and there's a sort of wicked problems, as we say. How do we strike a balance in this wicked problem? So one of the things that we want to achieve over here is realize the benefit of AI. How do we realize the benefit of the different AI technologies is one of the important goals. Next is we have to always ensure that there is patient safety all through. Patient safety cannot be compromised at any point in time. Are we ethical when these healthcare applications are being used? So these are some of the things that we keep in mind. And then keeping on this aspect also comes the aspect of productivity. How is the productivity of the doctors taken care of? By using AI, are those hospitals who are using AI, if you assume they are for profit, are they able to make better profit? Because profitability is one of their criteria that we cannot shy away with, and we have to accept that fact if we have to understand how the dynamics of the ecosystem work. So keeping this in constraint. Again, now there are the next set of issues that we come up to. The end user applications of AI. So what sort of end user applications are we looking at? So who is using the AI application? And there can be two ways we can look into this. The first one can be the healthcare professional, the doctor who is using the AI application. So you go to a doctor and you come to know that, and the doctor uses maybe some in the diagnosis process when the doctor is treating you, uses some component of AI. Maybe a certain portion of the diagnosis is done through AI. So the first ethical question that comes from the citizen's perspective is that, should they inform the patient? Should the doctor tell that I do 5 steps while I'm doing your diagnosis? Should he tell the patient that out of these 5 steps, steps 4 and 5 are done not by me, but by an intelligent machine? So, because we are talking about transparency in the system, should this be spoken out to the patient or not? I don't have the answer to that. I mean, this is how the regulations of the land will be determined. Once you know that the doctor is not doing certain things and is using some machine to do it, what does that impact on the fees collected? Maybe say normally you pay 500 rupees for a consultation for a doctor. Now you know the doctor is using an advanced machine. So from the doctor's perspective, he will think that I should hike the charges because I am using an advanced machine. So possibly the charges, instead of 500 rupees, it should now be 700 rupees. Whereas I, as a patient, I'm thinking that doctor is not seeing me properly, instead a machine is looking into me. So in this case, I should get a reduced fees. My fee should be 300 because the doctor is not spending the entire time looking into me. The machine is doing some of this work. So these are some of the dilemmas that we have when we look into the healthcare domain. The other aspect is quite straightforward, where we have a citizen and a patient in the loop. And I think here in this case, the only thing that we look at is that the citizen who is directly using this application, the AI application, and this is in this example, I just limited to AI chatbots only. So they should be aware that this is a chatbot, and the predictions are not something that is written on stone. The predictions can be wrong, and the person should be aware of those things. And such information should be made aware to the people when they start using this application, making them aware that this is an automated decision making based on historic data and things of those nature. Now the next type of dilemmas that come into the question: when to use an AI healthcare application? Now, we have seen several different presentations from the morning about healthcare, and I'm really happy that those three type of presentations happened, because now the audience who is listening to this can actually see which point they are coming in. These healthcare applications are actually helping the doctors in a lot of the cases. So when they're using this intelligent AI healthcare, is this alternative an improved alternative? Is it improved or not? So this is a question. Now we ask the question, is it the improvement for the patient, or is it the improvement for the doctor? The doctor might have a productivity increase by say doing diabetic retinopathy, the images that were previously being looked up by the ophthalmologist. He was spending 5 minutes on looking at every image. Now the doctor looks at can look at the image in only 1 minute, because the rest of the work is done by the computer vision, and he just verifies the results. So this is productivity improvement that is happening for the doctor or the healthcare professional. Is it a better outcome for the patient? Is what we have to come up with, and we have to understand. And this is what I was basically really talking about. In both cases, is the healthcare AI better for the patients or not? Then we can also argue to the third point, is that there are locations, and there was a lot of discussion when Wadhwani AI was talking about it, about the unavailability of doctors in rural areas. So in the rural areas, we have no doctor. Say a primary healthcare center is run in a village with only a nurse. In that case, can a nurse use an automated healthcare system to give some diagnosis for a patient who has come there? Because the doctor is not available and only the nurse is available. So in that case, is it a better alternative? So we have to see with the current situation, the healthcare output that is coming, is it better or not? So these are some of the dilemmas that we have to look into when we look into the healthcare AI perspective. Then we have a fear. I think that the previous speaker also looked into this aspect. Automation and job loss is also one of the fears. I think this is not something in the near future of 5 to 10 years which might happen, but this is something that can be there in the more long term, maybe 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years down the lines. I think this can happen. Will doctors be replaced by robots? Is one of the questions that we ask. AI technology can possibly develop in a long-term time. This is not in the next 5 or 10 years that we're looking at, but in the longer-term perspective to replace doctors. So what will doctors end up doing at that time? Will they be spending patients a lot of time developing AI algorithms? Because as you see from all the descriptions, developing this AI algorithm requires good amount of collaboration from the doctors and also good amount of collaboration from the AI engineers. So will they, that is the task that they will be doing. Is this a transition that the patients will like at the end or not? I think for now, the augmentation model works well, where doctors use this tool for productivity enhancement. Automated consultation, I think the law of the land will decide whether devices can actually prescribe your medicine or not. Currently, the chatbots that are functioning in India can only give you some recommendations, but they cannot go ahead and recommend medicines to you. So that is something that the law of the land has to decide whether this is possible or not. And that is where regulation comes in. In all of these, what is really missing and is the aspect of empathy and care. When you visit a doctor, it's not just for getting the diagnosis done, it's also the empathy and the care aspect that comes along with the doctor, which cannot be replaced with machines that we see. And Professor Sudeshna, when she was talking about, she also emphasized the roles of the teacher. However, we talk about the online learning, it cannot replace the teachers, because there will be an aspect of direct interaction with the teachers which need to remain, because that completes the learning cycle. And I think in this case, I think empathy and care is an important aspect about the whole healthcare thing. It's not just an robot doing some of those things. Now we come back to some of the more traditional issues, and I'm sure since morning we have also heard these issues have been discussed several times. Given the audience, I think you are now well aware of bias and fairness issues. Bias is one of the most prominent issues that are there in AI algorithm, and it primarily happens because of the target group, the group on which you are going to use your AI predictions on is not has some dissimilarity with the group on which you are trained the data. So say you develop your model on an US population, and now you bring that AI application and try to apply it on the population in India. So that is what you are trying to do. So that is will give you error, or you develop the application some time back, and now the things have changed. There can be racial groups which might be left out. There can be comorbidities and other health conditions which are not captured as part of the data. Then we also look into the data source. When we look into data source, we see that electronic health records are used primarily for this training activity. Now you have to understand that the more electronic health records that we use, the accuracy will increase, but it also means that we have to wait for infinite amount of time for go-to-market, which implies on the cost. And if you see, I consult with a few startups, we don't even think about that ethical aspect when you're a small startup. Your time to market is the most important thing, because that is what the venture capitalist funds are looking for. Your go to market and hitting the ground and getting some revenue. So who decides that? Again, regulators have to play an important role here. When we talk about the electronic health record, or electronic medical record per se, important aspect comes about this electronic health records were made available by the patients to the doctors or to the hospitals for the purpose of consultation. And I know there are several hospitals now in India, and when I was in Niti Aayog, I was also part of several efforts where we are trying to build large data sets of annotated data that can be used for healthcare research in the country. Some from say about 10 to 20 years back, at a time when privacy was not a fundamental right. Privacy became a fundamental right in India only in 2017, when the Puttaswamy judgment was passed by the Supreme Court bench, and we still don't have a data privacy bill. The first draft was made in 2018. It went to the parliamentary committee in November and December 2019, and it is still under the parliamentary joint committee headed by Shashi Tharoor on information technology. So once the recommendation is out, we will come to know what form the bill takes, and that will decide how personal data is treated in this country. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Family Healthcare also come up with the digital information system. You can look into this, because I'm not going to the details of that in the interest of time. Explainability and transparency is a very important aspect, and I'm very happy that Professor Pushpak, who are there in the morning session, gave a very nice explanation about the explainability aspect of algorithms. Like on one spectrum, you do a case-based matching where you know why you have taken a decision because your decision matched a certain case, and on the other extreme, you have like the deep learning based system. In middle, you have decision tree and regression type of systems, which are much more interpretable because we know why a decision has been taken for a certain thing. But for deep learning, it's much more difficult to communicate. And there is little scope for the deep learning system to communicate doubt. Even if there is a doubt that the algorithm has, it cannot communicate it to you. So how do doctors understand the reasons behind the decision? If it has to either understand it or explain it to the patients, there is no way that this deep learning algorithms do that. Algorithms are, on the other hand, have a very different objective. So I think that objective function also has to change. So they are primarily for maximizing the prediction accuracy, often gives high confidence to wrong decisions, and likely to provide wrong decisions for new scenarios when certain scenarios are not known. So this is how the state of explainability and transparency are. Going to the aspect of accountability, So this is sort of a multi-party activity. So doctors use this AI prediction for treating patient. This is the application developer has a role in developing the application for certain type of user groups with certain comorbidities in case. And in current scenario, these groups independently. So there is a need for a collaboration between these various parties. And then when there is a mishap that we are leading to liability, how do we choose, how do you find out what went wrong? So how do you identify the reason of the failure in a black box scenario? In certain cases, recommendations that are given are that doctors have to be vigilant about potential errors, so they should know what are the potential errors that these systems can bring in, and not have over-reliance on automated decision-making system. These are some of the things which are there. But then I think primarily we have a lot of ethical aspect, but the final aspect that comes in is that when there's a liability due to medical negligence, and if we can prove the medical negligence, then the nursing home or the doctor can be liable to a fine. So public awareness of medical negligence in India is growing. The Consumer Protection Act has many patients have filed for cases against doctor, and once the negligence is established and they have received compensation claim, in this case, for establishing the negligence, they have to establish that the doctors didn't follow the reasonable path. And there are three particular aspects from the healthcare perspective that you have to prove: that the right course of treatment was not taken. That's number one. The doctor was either not skilled enough, or in the third case, the followed method was not the best suited for the patient condition based on the protocols that are there. Now, this is there for the doctor in the loop. Now, can we extend this sort of principles to an AI device or an AI application? Is what has to be done. Now we look into the clinical trial for drug testing, and I'll just show you an image. Now you see the intensity in which the process goes through before a drug comes to the market. You first spend several years on a small participant group, study the efficacy of it, and all this are documented all through the process. Whereas for AI system, when we look at, there's a testing for the large number of groups of diverse user groups. I was very happy to hear that when our speaker from California spoke today, I think Mr. Roy, Dr. Roy, when he spoke about it, he told that that when they deploy their system, they go through a large number of testing on user groups, which is a very good thing. But are they doing it out of genuine interest, or are they doing because there is a regulation in place? As per my understanding, there is no regulation that exists today in India in place. So I can have a greedy objective and not follow any of this and just test it on some people and launch it on the market. So there is a need for regulation. Yes, I'll just finish in the next 2-3 minutes. And then sharing this results in public domain so the regulator can keep track of. It's also interesting to note that not all of them has 100% success rate, but it's important that these tests are noted and they are put in the public domain. I think that is what is the most important thing. And the last slide that I have is for the individual user, because in all of these cases, we have assumed that there is a healthcare professional who is in the loop and who is taking the decision. When there's the individual user, and then the only aspect that we have to think about is that making the user aware that this is coming from an AI chatbot, and give those suggestions so that they can be aware of this. And there are several apps that are doing that in the Indian scenario. I think with that, I'll come to an end. Thanks for this opportunity, and happy to take some questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sarkar, Avik Sarkar, for those interesting insights and thoughts on AI in healthcare. Basically, understanding the ethics aspect. From a larger perspective and from a policy perspective, ethics in AI is very, very important because that forms the groundwork for some very relevant debate that experts keep on having related to whether it's ethical to have whether the question of biases in data, or whether it's even ethical to have AI in healthcare, considering that AI as a subject could be held accountable for certain privacy and security related issues. So this aspect of ethics of AI particularly is very, very pertinent and relevant. So there's one question that has been asked by an audience person, Mr. Anil. What kind of policy guidelines are needed for robotic surgery or robotic assisted surgery? Basically, what he's trying to ask is that robotic surgery and telemedicines are becoming revolutionary. So what kind of policy guidelines are required?
Yes, so see, when these policy guidelines are developed, usually say bodies like International Standards Organization or the IEEE first comes up with some standards on what the equipment needs to have a standard, and those are then extended for the country perspective. So, so the Bureau of Indian Standards have a committee on the standards for artificial intelligence, which interestingly is headed by Professor Pushpak Bhattacharya, who is interacting with the global players with different countries to set the standards on AI. So this is on AI, and similarly there are like on robotics, another ISO committee that is working on that aspect. So there are a lot of work that is going on at the governance and the regulation level, and usually these are the type of organizations that we do not hear too much about. So I think having more discussions on those fronts will be very helpful.
Right.
So I think once it comes from there, then the country sort of adopts them.
Also, you were mentioning about this Niti Aayog discussion paper. Like, it was a very good aspect from the government side of putting together a discussion paper because it captures a lot of relevant aspects. They have also mentioned about consortium of AI councils. So, in that context, how would ethics of AI be picturized in that picture? Like if we come up with India comes up with consortium of AI councils, for instance, so then would that aspect of ethics in AI, and when the experts keep talking about biasness in database and privacy and security issues, would that be addressed?
Yes, so that's a very interesting aspect. So you saw those different areas like institutions for core AI, institutions for application-oriented AI. So what this document talks about is that India needs to have this sort of these organizations that will look into these various aspects. So different organizations would actually apply bid for these things, and they will be setting up. Some has already been set up. I think Intel has set up something for the mobility sector. Some other institutions have set up, IITs have set up something on healthcare and education aspects for the transformational AI projects. Again, for the ethics part, I think there is no organization which has come together with a proposal on doing that entire spectrum of things. So I think that is a huge opportunity that lies today.
Right.
Our organization, because if you see, there are social science organizations in the country, without naming any, but they are very good in social sciences, but they do not have that AI or that engineering knowledge there. So we need AI, technological, arts, or social studies, and the law. These three aspects to come together along with the domain that you are trying to work upon.
Absolutely, that's great. Okay, great. With this, we come to an end of this session, and thank you so much, Dr. Sarkar. It was amazing, and it was so interesting to hear you out. I mean, we have read the discussion paper ourselves, but hearing, the first-hand experience from someone who has actually worked on that discussion paper, it's amazing. So thank you so much.